On the program is the keynote dialogue. Let us ask the panelists to come on the stage. Please welcome them with a round of applause. I now hand over the microphone to Mr. Jesper Koll, who will moderate the keynote dialogue.
Masato, welcome to Tokyo. I'm very excited. These are very interesting times. As you may know, the Bank of Japan has just increased interest rates a little bit. 0.5% is the interest rate now, but we're here to discuss the global economic outlook as well as some of the specific issues here in Japan. And I am absolutely delighted and thrilled to have two Japanese policy superstars on my side here. We've got on the far, on your left, Nakaso-san. I don't think Nakaso-san needs much of an introduction. He served a very stunning and long career at the Bank of Japan, all the way up to deputy governor, and has been involved in the establishment and the progress of Tokyo Financial Center, for a long, long time. And we're very honored, to have him here. And then in the middle, we've got the Mr. Yen from the Ministry of Finance. He always gets angry when I tell him that, but that's okay. Long career at the Ministry of Finance, Kanda-san, all the way up to Vice Minister, and he is bound to go to become the head of the Asian Development Bank in, next month? On the 24th, it's not Valentine's Day, but on the 24th of February. And so, fantastic position to be in. And, we're going to talk a little bit about the global economic outlook. We're going to talk about the Japanese key policies there. And let's start. Last year was a very shaky year. I mean, lots of uncertainties, lots of political change that happened. The Federal Reserve beginning to cut interest rates here. Now, Nakaso-san, may I start with you? Yeah, sure. Are you, so, when you look back at the past year, what should we be watchful for 2025?
Okay. Thank you. First, I want to make a retrospective review on the year of 2024, if I may. The perspective, I think, tells us that the global economy remained fragmented against the backdrop of persistent geopolitical tensions and heightened conflict between the United States and China. The global trade pattern, for example, has shifted quite dramatically in that while the direct exports from China to the US grew only moderately in the past few years, there was a significant growth in export from China to ASEAN economies during the period. And corresponding growth was observed in exports from ASEAN to the US. And I think this implies a diversion of trade flow away from direct trade between China and the US. And as a matter of fact, a similar pattern was observed in export growth from China to Mexico and Canada, which ended up increases in exports from these economies to the US. The IMF, the most recent January World Economic Outlook shows that the global economy grew by 3.2% in 2024 and is projected to grow by 3.3% in 2025 and 26. Now, these numbers are not particularly impressive when compared with economic growth, average growth rate in the past decades was 3.7%. So I think the economic fragmentation will weigh on the global growth. And among the advanced economies, the US demonstrated robustness powered by strong consumption. But this was offset, so to speak, by weaknesses elsewhere, in particular the euro area, where growth has been continuously subdued. And meanwhile, China's problem, I think, has facing problems. And it seems to me that the economy is on the verge of deflation with a negative output gap and inflation rates remaining at lower levels. So then, going forward into 2025, the global economy will likely remain fragmented, I think. And the IMF says that medium-term risk to the baseline is tilted towards the downside. I think the near-term uncertainty surrounding global economy is compounded by Trump 2.0. Although details of policies are not disclosed in full, but I tend not to underestimate the potential impact of the US-led policies on the rest of the world. I think the policies are driven by the recognition by the American administration that the past globalization did probably do more harm than good, in that it created a powerful external competitor and resulted in persistent trade imbalances against the US, while internally it widened inequality. So they may head for a kind of restructuring global economic order to reverse the trend in their favor. Now that said, policy consequences of the economy are highly uncertain. I think not everything that Mr. Trump is going to do will be inflationary, not necessary. For example, simple extension of tax cut is not inflationary unless accompanied by further cuts in income or corporate taxes. And higher tariffs are obviously inflationary initially, but could prove disinflationary or contractionary if higher prices bite into consumption subsequently. Mr. President Trump says also, drill, baby, drill. This could result in lower energy costs and thus also disinflationary. And likewise, retrenchment in climate actions will discourage energy innovation that shapes competitiveness of key industries in the future. Meanwhile, deregulation on M&A and deportation of immigrants are clearly inflationary. So what I'd like to say is that policy consequences are highly unpredictable and mixed. And this, I think, adds to the uncertainties to the global economic environment that we are going to navigate this year.
No, thank you very much, Nakaso-san. So a couple of keywords here: fragmentation, right? And obviously uncertainty. Whether we like it or not, America is the world's largest economy, almost $30 trillion worth, of a global economy of about $100 trillion. And, you know, it's not just the uncertainty over what policies will actually be done, but it's also an uncertainty of how much of the policy announcement can actually be implemented, right, and actually influence, you know, investment decisions that, as we all know, are not just short-term trading decisions, but if you are a real economic actor, if you are a company, you need to have trust that the economic policies will actually have traction and be sustained for a while. So we've got the fragmentation and the uncertainty, including the uncertainty over the president's, you know, I mean, what is a fake policy, as it were, and what is a real policy that actually gets traction. Sensei, your overview. What have we learned from 2024 and some of the things that you're looking at for 25?
Thank you very much indeed, Jesper-san. First of all, it's a great honor and pleasure to be here, particularly because I've been actively engaged in the Global Financial City initiative for more than a decade, since I was task manager of Joint Secretariat for the panel of vitalizing financial and capital market, including Tokyo International Financial Center Initiative in 2013. And I highly appreciate the strong leadership of Governor Koike-san and Chairman Nakaso-san in further advancing this initiative. So I get back to your great question, and I don't have much to add to the excellent presentation by Nakaso-san, but looking back at the global landscape in 2024, we saw that inflation in major Western countries was on the decline, and there was a shift towards easing monetary policy, albeit in a gradual manner. On the other hand, 1,000 days has passed since the start of Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, and conflicts in Middle East also escalated. These geopolitical tensions have continued to pose a major downside risk to the global economy. Global flows of trades and capitals could be severely affected by geopolitical conflicts and trade tensions amongst major economies. Such a risk is called geo-economic fragmentation, as you mentioned, and this was one of the most discussed topics in the international fora, such as G7 and G20. Under these circumstances, Japan has been advocating the importance to enhance resilience of supply chains and, more broadly, economic security. The RISE initiative, which aims to strengthen the resilience of supply chains of products related to clean energy, was launched during Japan's G7 presidency in 2023. This reflects Japan's commitment to a constructive approach to economic security, one that promotes development of economies in supply chains while promoting global public goods. Additionally, national elections were held in many countries last year, and there were changes in administration in a number of these countries. In the United States, of course, President Trump was just inaugurated this week, and even before the inauguration, he had proposed various policies regarding tariffs and the war in Ukraine and others. And he has issued a series of executive orders from day one advocating the revolution of common sense. We are also aware of the phenomena so-called Trump trades have been taking place in financial markets, in which trades are made based upon reports on tariff policies and other trends related to President Trump. Most importantly, there exhibits highest uncertainty, which were addressed by both Nakaso-san and Jesper-san. And as you rightly suggested, it is totally unclear what will be implemented, for whom, how much magnitude, when, and from what reason. And many factors, including their implication for inflation, would be taken into account, although they are very much complex. This means we have ample room for preparation, or discussion, and negotiation. As I was elected as the next president of the ADB, Asian Development Bank, who is required of political neutrality very much strictly, I would refrain from making comments on specific policies of any country's policies and this impact at this stage. But the US policy changes, including hikes in tariffs and geopolitics, could create various impact on the global economy, obviously. So the outlook for 2025 is again full of uncertainty. As the next president of ADB, I will continue to be vigilant to the development of global and regional economic policies and their implication for the regional economies. And I will take leadership on working together with all ADB member countries. Thank you very much indeed.
Kanda-san, thank you so much. And I was very, very glad that you brought up and raised the issue of the war. It's the war in the Ukraine, and then obviously the Middle East. I mean, thank God there is a there is a temporary ceasefire, that has been negotiated. But in addition to the policy uncertainties, it's not just the energy market that is affected, but it adds uncertainty to the future fiscal outlook. Specifically, for example, when you look at Europe, and this affects Japan as well, the pressure to raise fiscal spending for defense, whether it is kinetic defense, buying more weaponry, whether it is preparing for cybersecurity, it raises additional demands on fiscal policymakers, which adds additional uncertainty for overall policymaking coming through. And that's where we want to go to the next question, honing things in a little bit. Because, when you've got strong government, predictable government with clear policies, monetary policy is relatively easy to conduct. But with this uncertainty over fiscal policy and policy settings in general, monetary policy is becoming very, very complicated. And that's where we've got huge uncertainty in the foreign exchange markets as well as in the interest rate markets here. But let's focus on Japan. Last year, finally, the Bank of Japan began to normalize. It's a long process after almost one generation of zero interest rates, more or less, right? Gradually, and today, obviously, we had the second, or not, we had the third move with short-term interest rates now being at 0.5%. So, Nakaso-san, how should we think about the Bank of Japan and this process of normalization going forward?
Okay, thank you for the question. First of all, talk about the economy, Japanese economy. I think it remains on track to sustain growth because the output gap is closing and the very tight labor market condition is putting upward pressure on wages and prices. So over the course of 2025-26, the price stability target of 2% would likely be reached on a stable manner. So I think it is probably fair to say that the mission for monetary policy to overcome deflation is completed.
Yeah.
Mission completed. So it's against this background that the Bank of Japan in March last year embarked on policy normalization by lifting all of the unconventional monetary policy measures that had been employed for a long, long time. Now, monetary policy normalization, the question you asked, comprises two pillars. One is raising the policy rate, and the other is QT, quantitative tightening, or downsizing the balance sheet size. First of all, on the policy rate, it will be raised carefully but steadily, as the Bank of Japan just decided today, a few hours ago, after confirming that the economic and inflation trajectory remains consistent with their projection. And I am also relatively optimistic about the likelihood of Japan's economy remaining on track. So I think this favorable outlook, to the extent it is maintained, I think this paves the way to further rate hikes in Japan. Now, in the first place, real interest rates remain deeply negative in Japan, both for short-term and long-term interest rates. And therefore, another, let's say, couple of policy rate hikes wouldn't materially change the picture, the situation. Therefore, I don't buy the story that the BOJ's rate hike in July last year is to be blamed for the market disruption in early August, because it is very hard for me to understand monetary accommodation has been withdrawn enough to trigger such a market instability last summer. Although I admit that raising policy rate at the right timing is a complicated a job that requires utmost care and deliberation. It is a reversion, if you like, to traditional monetary policy making. Unlike navigating the uncharted waters of unconventional monetary policies, raising policy rate is an operation with a kind of deja vu that the central bank was once accustomed to long time ago. So the BOJ should focus on making decisions at every monetary policy meeting after checking the macroeconomic and inflation outlook. Now, how far, you might want to ask, rates can go up? Depends on the level of the, I think this depends on the level of the so-called natural rate. The BOJ published an estimate of R star, their R star, ranging between minus 1.0% and plus 0.5%. So if you assume an R star to be minus 0.5%, I guess the BOJ would for example, if the R star to be minus 0.5, then the nominal neutral rate after adding 2% inflation rate will be 1.5%. So I guess the BOJ would tentatively head for 1% policy rate and then check whether there is more room for further rate hikes. So that's policy rate. And the QT, meanwhile, also in July last year, the BOJ also embarked on balance sheet reduction, which is the second pillar, as I mentioned, of monetary policy normalization. And technically, the BOJ runs down the JGB as they mature. The speed of the reduction will be controlled by monthly new purchases, which they said will be reduced in steps from 6 trillion to 3 trillion by Q1 of 2026. This pace of reduction is very moderate, only to decline by a mere 7.7% by Q1 of 2026 from the pre-normalization level. So it's going to be a very lengthy, long process. Japan's benign economic growth and inflation outlook, I think, argue in favor of the view, in summary, that overall policy normalization will be pursued very carefully but steadily.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Nakaso-san, and I'm so glad that you actually did tell us the estimate of potential neutral rates, and who knows, it will be a little bit try and error, but I mean, for us in the private sector, for us as investors, one way to look at what the Bank of Japan is doing is that the Bank of Japan is actually re-privatizing Japanese financial markets. And that as a result of the Bank of Japan going out of the way and money and interest getting a price again, as a result of that, the opportunities for financial intermediaries, whether they are banks or whether they're investors or whether they're insurance companies, this is a re-privatization that actually creates a big fundamental tailwind for the goal of the Japanese government, which is to establish and promote further the asset management and financial services industry here in Japan. So I think it's very important to recognize this, right? The pace we can all debate about, but for all intents and purposes, reliquefying private markets by the government big central bank getting out of the way is good news for us in the private sector. There's a profit opportunity that is actually starting to open up. Now, Kanda-san, let's go to the second question in the sort of realm, which is your expertise, and you don't have to give away any secrets. But the yen has obviously been fluctuating. It remains a high volatile currency relative to some of the other currencies here. So what lessons do you think does the yen volatility hold for the Japanese economy?
Thank you very much indeed. This is an extremely relevant question. In recent years, we have faced multiple shocks that have severely destabilized international financial markets, including the foreign exchange market. The pandemic-related supply disruptions alongside the release of pent-up demand and accumulated savings underpinned by massive fiscal support led to strong inflationary pressures. On top of that, Russia's illegal war against Ukraine led to a severe energy and food crisis, fueling decades-high global inflation. In response, central banks rapidly tightened monetary policy, heightening financial market volatility, including in the forex market, and historically, an abrupt tightening of monetary and financial conditions pose significant economic challenges, especially for vulnerable countries and people, together with financial market turmoil, and including the international financial crisis, tequila shock, or other global financial crisis. This time too, despite our old efforts to avoid it, it has happened. Heightened FX volatility has a large adverse impact on economic activities in Japan. Only about 20% of Japan's imports are denominated in yen. In stark contrast, almost all US imports are denominated in the US dollars, and European G7 members have roughly 70 to 80% of their imports denominated in euros. This means sharp movement in the yen have a much larger impact on Japan's import prices and have a direct negative impact on Japanese households and the businesses that heavily depend upon imports, particularly food and fuel. As such, in the face of excessive volatility in the FX market, with aggressive speculative activities behind the scene, I couldn't possibly sit by and allow such activities to unduly harm our citizens. We had no choice but to step into the FX market. More recently, although the monetary policy stances and the market environment have changed, volatile market movement and heightened uncertainty have required continued vigilance. Financial markets remain extremely sensitive to economic developments and the outlook for the decisions of the major central banks. Markets increase focus and speculation on the White House's new policy agenda has contributed to this fragility. Many countries face renewed challenges from rapid and large currency movement in recent months, which have caused headaches for households, businesses, and us policymakers as well. In such a shock-prone world, Japan should accelerate its determined efforts to implement reforms that will address the medium and long-term challenges and revitalize the market economy, which was suggested by two speakers. For instance, the returning market focus on fiscal soundness, particularly in Europe, is raising a red flag about the underlying vulnerabilities of prolonged profligacy. This is not a fire on another shore. In the JGB market, the share of foreign investors' holdings and trading GGBs has been steadily increasing. To avoid market turbulence, continued efforts to reform spending and revenue and to ensure these investors' confidence in Japan's fiscal sustainability are crucial. In addition, improving the domestic investment environment through structural reform is also crucial, not only for attracting stable sources of investment, but also for revitalizing the Japanese economy. I will come back to this point later, but for now, I'd like to draw your attention to the so-called long-term trend in the yen-real effective exchange rate. It has depreciated by as much as 64%. 64% from its peak in 1995 to its current record low. In general, real export sector is lower than that of, in general, real effective exchange rate tends to depreciate when the productivity of the economy's export sector is lower than that of other countries. This is a stark reminder of the urgent need to revitalize the Japanese economy through structural reform. Thank you very much.
No, Kanda-san, I was so glad that you mentioned and talked about fiscal policy, because obviously we in finance, we want to talk about monetary policy. This is nice, this is natural. But on the fiscal policy side, right, the need for some consolidation, for some clear-cut target. For example, the investors that I speak with, they always tell me, well, yes, it's nice. We see Japan doubling its defense spending, but we don't know how it's going to be paid for. And so, there is some room, right, to actually have greater clarity. Nakaso-san, can I ask you, as a central banker, as a former central banker, how do you look at Japanese fiscal policy?
Thank you very much. I was very glad to hear Kanda-san refer to fiscal sustainability and the importance of real growth in the context of real exchange rate. By the way, I have known Mr. Kanda for a long time, and I have always admired his dedication in serving the nation. And therefore, I'm very glad that he pointed out two things that I would like to reiterate, if I may. In my view, establishment of sustainable fiscal structure and achieving higher potential growth rates are the two remaining interrelated missions for the government, I think. And first and foremost, restoring fiscal sustainability, I think, is an urgent task, given the fact that Japan's debt to GDP ratio stand at 250%, which is by far the highest among G7 peers. And this is arguably the primary reason why Japan's sovereign rating by international agencies remains relatively low at a single A status. Moreover, as I mentioned in my previous remarks, BOJ's monetary policy, BOJ recedes as the most dominant buyer of JGBs. So somebody else, most likely overseas investors must fill the gap. And unless, of course, fiscal deficit is reduced dramatically. Now, overseas investors tend to require, I think, higher premia, and thus higher interest rates in view of Japan's debt outstanding. Unsustainable fiscal structure, if left unaddressed, will not only undermine the credibility of Japan's fiscal management, but also prove a major blow to the real economy, as the funding cost, both for banks and business corporations, rises higher than otherwise. Now, economic theories tell us that in order to prevent the debt GDP from overshooting and be placed under control, it is necessary that a combination of higher real growth rates exceeding long-term interest rates and restoration of the primary balance is achieved. Yeah. We need these two. And we also know that balancing the primary balance on a sustained basis requires, again, higher real growth rates. So in summary, higher potential growth rates contribute to restoring Japan's fiscal sustainability. Higher potential growth rate is, by the way, the goal of Japan's growth strategy. Yeah. This can be achieved by investment to address labor shortage and fostering innovation. Thus, sustainability of fiscal structure and growth strategy are interrelated in my view. And incidentally, these two are important arrows of Abenomics. Since these two missions, as we heard, remain unaccomplished, a challenge for Japan, I think Abenomics in this regard is no way obsolete. As I mentioned earlier, the Bank of Japan's policy normalization is expected to progress over an extended period of time, very slowly and carefully, with a view to maintaining market stability. So the government should take advantage of the time bought in achieving the two challenging goals that remain.
It's absolutely fascinating because, when you look at the private sector in Japan. I think you can argue that the metabolism is back, right? You find that corporate leaders, and it's interesting whether they are large companies or whether they are chusho kigyo, whether they are small companies, investing into productive assets, right? As well as investing in human capital, right, is actually starting to happen. The liquidity, the pulse of Japan is there. And of course, also for us in the equity markets, the market for corporate control is now open. It's not just a bunch of activists or black sheep trying to open Japan. Now you've got, you know, a very healthy market. I mean, look at what's going on with the largest or one of the largest convenience store chains. This is a very healthy development in the sense that you've got, you know, actors, not just financial actors, but operators and now white knights trying to fight it out. What is the value and what should be the company, the strategy for that company going forward? So very interesting. And the government on the fiscal side, you know, obviously the temptation of baramaki, right? The temptation is very large, particularly when you lose popularity for whatever reason. But hopefully, you know, there will be some fiscal discipline that can be imposed. Maybe you can do this from Manila, you know, but as a joke. Let's move on to the last sort of topic here. What specific initiatives should the Japanese government undertake to realize this growth strategy goal that Japan actually becomes an asset management nation? The focus on the asset management industry. What can be done? What should be done? Where are Japan's competitive advantages in the asset management industry? Who wants to go first? Dozo.
Thank you very much. From the bright landscape, Japanese economy has suffered from low economic growth over the past 3 decades. In order to resist deflation and achieve a transition to a growth-oriented economy, the government has worked on a full range of economic policies. And we can, you know, I think for the first time, achieve to some extent positive results of the initiatives in a wide range of data, including the highest wage increase in 33 years, record high corporate earnings, and capital investment, robust GDP growth. We shouldn't miss this precious opportunity and should ensure it leads to a lasting transformation of the economy. I believe that we've got to tackle key macroeconomic challenges facing the Japanese economy, which are enhancing competitiveness. In other words, in the Nakaso-san's words, raising the potential growth rate, and further promoting capital investment in Japan, including by attracting global investors. To that end, market mechanisms should be revitalized. You mentioned the metabolism. This is quite right. The repeated and easy reliance on fiscal stimulus and monetary easing has created a sense of a moral hazard and free lunch movement and zombie farms and reduced productivity throughout the economy. Higher interest rate and the higher interest rates and wages, higher wages with, of course, proper safety nets will likely prompt a healthy cycle of firm entry and exit and smooth transition of labor into growing sectors from shrinking ones. So, you know, workers will enjoy higher wages, which expand the consumption, thereby growing corporate profit, which will enable corporates to increase wages furthermore. So this kind of, you know, good cycle, we are, you know, actually at the door, and we can't possibly miss these great opportunities. And in terms of fostering market mechanisms, it is also important to ensure transparency in the disclosure of the financial and corporate information and other corporate governance reform. I've chaired the OECD Corporate Governance Committee for 8 years and finalized the revision of the OECD G20 corporate governance principles, which was endorsed by the G20 leaders, which serve as a single global standard for corporate governance. along with the implementation of the principles, Japan is also working hard to and further making efforts to enhance corporate disclosure, strengthen the roles of outside directors, and increase the diversity of the board members, and so on. Also, Japan needs to further create enabling environment to foster domestic investment and attract foreign investments. The initiative for promoting Japan as a leading asset management center represents our core efforts on the finance side to bolster the virtuous cycle of the economy. It is an ambitious reform package aimed at boldly changing Japan's entire flow of capital. Thank you very much.
Excellent. So the ambition is there and the focus is there, that it's an essential part, right, for the future prosperity of Japan. Sensei.
Actually, I don't have much to add to what's been said, and I have already sort of referred to in my previous remarks on the importance of growth. So I have little to add as far as this issue is concerned.
Let me do, sort of one final, very quick sort of commentary or question for you, right? And this is, sort of, we talked about the external conditions, changing global trade patterns, changing possible fragmentation, huge uncertainty over what the largest economy in the world is actually going to be able to do. Also in contrast a little bit that, Japan is not just looking up, but is on track towards a genuine virtuous cycle. Very quickly, from both of you, if I may, what are the domestic risks in Japan that keep you up at night?
I have shallow sleeps these days anyway, I'm getting age. Anyway, but domestic issue, one domestic issue I might raise for that creates uncertainty is the sustainability of consumption. Consumption used to be a bit weak during the course of 2024, now recovering. I think that has a lot to do with how wages, nominal wages, are going to catch up with the inflation rate. And that is probably one of the reasons why the BOJ was waiting for this time around monetary policy meeting to make sure wages on the way up. I think there's a high likelihood that consumption would be underpinned by continuously rising real wages, and therefore real wages. It's coming, and I think this is used to be a bit of an uncertainty, but with the renewed kind of statistics and information from the market and analysis, I think I'm a bit more optimistic about the sustainability of consumption. But consumption, I think, remains a focal issue.
Yep. Sensei?
Thank you very much. Probably I will take a bit different perspective because I think in almost all of economic policies we have a sort of consensus for the direction, although it is very much difficult to implement because of the political situation or the international global circumstances. So the most important thing is how to ensure the sound space for the policy discussion, with the objective data and the right logics. And this is very much difficult in almost all of countries, and this is one of the reasons why the political stability is really undermined. But further thing is, it might be the sense of inequality or the actually a sort of the sense of poverty amongst the negligible population. And it created the populist movement, or at least the distrust of the institutions of existing things, everything. And another thing, this situation is exacerbated by the internet or platform, filter bubble, or echo chamber and even the prevailing fake news has made our discussion very much difficult. So it's from a public sector side, what we've got to do is to try to not only explain but the share as much objective information as possible to the population, and also trying to create the interactive space for discussion, but it is really challenging. I think the most fundamental risk or challenge for all the domestic policies in almost all countries is this kind of the transformation of the public discussion. Thank you very much.
And, yep.
One final word. Since Kanda-san is here, and we are both from public sector dealing with international affairs, I said there's a lot of uncertainties coming from international environment. It is for all the more for this reason, I think Japan should have a good team in the public sector to deal with the countries around, try to strike a good balance between its own national interest and with the aim of harmonizing, maintaining a global economic order. For that to have in place is very important for Japan. So good team with a good vision and good perspective of the longer term, I think is absolutely essential.
This is so good, and as you know, I'm an advocate for Pax Nipponica, that in this age of uncertainty and lack of trust in the two big powers, the room, right, and the need for a global mediator and somebody who you can trust. And we work in finance. This is about finance. Finance is all about two things. Number one is about the future. Because we want to build a better future, we need to invest. And to invest, we need finance to make it better. But we also need number two, which is trust. Trust is the most important thing, right? Shindai dekiru Nippon. You can trust Japan. And Japan's focus on raising asset income for its people, because the goal of the asset management initiative in Japan is not to make bankers richer, but the goal is to make Mr. and Mrs. Watanabe richer, that indeed the benefits of Japan being the largest creditor country on earth, that the benefits of this stock of assets actually starts to flow into the pockets and into the prosperity of the Japanese people. And we are here from the governments, from the public sector, to facilitate this, to build the trust and create the backbone. And we invite all of you to participate in this, because this is a policy that will not be stopped all of a sudden by presidential decree. This is national policy. Japan will become an asset management superpower. I want to thank my two Dai-senpai, Dai-sensei. I wish you good luck in Manila, leading the ADB. Don't be shy to put a little pressure on the Japanese. Always good. And Nakaso-san, I do hope that you will be able to sleep soundly, right? Because you're doing such a wonderful job, and it's always a joy to listen to your thoughts and elaborations. And I want to thank the audience, and I do hope that you will come and join me in being more bullish on Japan. Thank you.
皆様ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much. Let's thank the panelists with a round of applause.